Hey guys, this is BuilderDude35, and in this week's tutorial I'll be doing a walkthrough of how I programmed my sumo robot, K3MOSAB3. Now I'm making this video because of overwhelming popular demand. I've gotten so many requests for a tutorial on how to program a sumo robot, really a lot more than any other request that I've gotten. So here it goes, here's the video. I'm not necessarily going to tell you how to program a sumo robot because there's so many different things that you could do with it, so many potential paths that you could take. So I'm going to tell you how I programmed my sumo robot, walk you step by step through the code, and hopefully that will give you some ideas as to what you can do for the sumo robot. So the first thing you're going to notice here is if we zoom out all the way through the whole part of the program, there is a lot going on in this program, and I'm going to try to break it up as much as I can to make it much easier for you to digest. So taking a look at the program as a whole, we have 4 different branches that are running in the program simultaneously, and each of them does a different thing. The top branch right here, this first branch, contains the majority of the code that the robot's going to run. All of its code that runs its motors and sensors and does certain things when certain conditions are detected by the sensors. And this first branch works hand in hand with these third and fourth branches. What these 2 branches are is they read values off of the sensor. In this case, this top one's the color sensor and this bottom one's the infrared sensor, and it checks the values coming from these sensors, and when it meets a certain condition, what it's going to do is it's going to tell this piece of code up here to skip over a loop block and then move on to the next sequence. So this has all of the command sequences defined up here, and then these 2 branches of code are going to dictate which sequence of code is going to be played up here. And of course I'll explain that in a little more detail in a second. This branch of code in the middle here is kind of like a combination of both, where it reads a sensor. In this case it's the gyro sensor specifically. It reads the gyro sensor's angle, and if that reaches a certain condition, it has the power to override this top branch here and instead run the code that's just down here. More on that in just a second. So as good a place to start as any is going to be with this top string of code blocks right here. And I'll start with this beginning sequence. This is really simple. Basically all it does is, since the robot starts facing out of the arena, what it does is it just has the robot drive in reverse a little bit and then do kind of like 360 turnaround. So now it's facing the inside of the arena, facing its opponent. So that's pretty simple. Then it moves on to this part with the loop blocks, and like I mentioned before, this part is going to take dictation from here. But I'll explain to you what each of these parts of the code here is going to do. So anyway, if I could zoom in just a little bit. Okay, so looking here, there's 3 different actions that the robot is going to carry out once it enters this part of the code. So the first is searching, which is basically when the robot's driving around, it'll drive forward for a certain duration of time, then it'll stop, and then it'll sweep its front left and then its front to the right, and then move back into the center. And the reason why it does this sweeping is so it can find its opponent. Sweeps left, sweeps right, and it just keeps repeating this until it gets the command from those lower 2 branches when to move on, and I'll explain that later. And if it does get the signal to move on, if it senses its opponent, what it's going to do is move into this block, and this is compressed into a my block. This is the charge opponent my block. So I'll show you what that does right now. This is opening up charge opponent, and basically what this my block does is it checks the proximity on the infrared sensor that's in a front. So it's going to check to see if an opponent's in front of it, and if it's yes, then what it's going to do is drive forward at full power. And it's also simultaneously checking the color sensor all the while, and the color sensor is what's going to detect whether or not the robot's running out of the course, out of the arena, sorry, which is of course what you don't want, because then you just basically make yourself lose. So charge opponent basically just runs the motors forward if an opponent is detected, and also will automatically stop the robot if it senses that it's going to come out of the arena. So pretty simple, and that's what that is doing in that part right there, charge opponent. And if it's given the command to skip over this and to skip over this, we go into this color react loop block, which is what happens when the robot detects that it's coming out of the arena. It's going to stop its drive motors, then it's going to drive in reverse and then do a turn so it avoids driving outside of the arena. And now I'm going to go back out a little bit so we can look at these two branches down here. Like I said, these two branches determine what part of the code is going to be played up here. This first branch is the color sensor branch, where it checks the conditions of the color sensor, and the purpose of this is to see whether or not the robot is driving over the arena. Now, by default, the robot, the Sumo robot, is going to be running this searching code, and the sensors are going to determine which loop it moves on to. I've said that a few times before. But this bottom branch is reading the infrared sensor in the front to check to see if there's opponent. So in the normal running of the program, it's going to be in this searching loop, and then what happens is if this bottom branch sees that an opponent is within range of the front infrared sensor, it's going to tell it to skip out of searching here and then go into this opponent charge loop, where it's going to play the charge opponent my block, as I explained before. And it's going to keep doing that until it finds that there's no more opponent left, and then it returns to searching. And if it's in searching again, it could also see the color sensor. If that comes within the selected state, it's going to tell it to skip over the searching loop into this loop, and then skip over the charge opponent loop into the color react loop, so that it can avoid driving out of the arena. So to make a long story short, by default it's searching. If it sees an opponent within range with its infrared sensor, it's going to move onto the charging opponent sequence. Or if it sees the selected color with its color sensor, it knows it's moving outside the arena, and then it's going to back up and turn around to avoid that. And then each time after it finishes either of those two actions, it's always going to return back to the searching sequence. So now finally I'll get to explaining what this middle branch here does. This is the forklift evasion branch, and what this does is it uses the gyro sensor to detect whether or not the robot is being lifted up by an opponent's forklift, and then it'll take the necessary measures to avoid it. Now, if you haven't seen the K3MOSAB3 video, go see that and you'll see this in action. And this, in my opinion, not to toot my own horn, but it's the coolest part of K3MOSAB3 that I feel. So I'll explain how this piece of code works. Right here in the beginning, what it's going to do is it's first going to wait just a little bit, and then it's going to reset the gyro. And this is using the drift be gone my block, and I'll show you what that looks like. And this is a little trick that was discovered by Carl4123 a while back, and it's just two like gyro blocks, and what it does is it, for some unknown reason, kind of stops or minimizes the gyro drift. So thanks to Carl for finding this, and that's just what that does. It's just a simple little thing that kind of minimizes the gyro drift. Why it does that, I have no idea, but it works. Anyway, what we have here is the forklift evasion loop right here, and what it does is it's, like I said before, a combination of the first and third and fourth branches, in the sense that it's simultaneously reading a sensor and it also contains its own actions. So what it's going to do is it's going to monitor its gyro sensor, and if it detects that the angle is greater than a certain number of degrees, it knows that the front end of the robot's being lifted up by an enemy's forklift. And what it does is it overrides anything that's happening in this top branch here, so it plays only this code down here, its own action code. So when it detects that angle increasing, it overrides to jump to here, and this is the sequence of events that the forklift evasion has to do. So it's going to deploy its jack, and it turns off of the forklift and then drops itself back down to escape from the enemy. And then at the end it's going to reset its gyro. And like I said, really go see the video of K3MOSAB3 in action, because it's really cool. You won't regret it. I mean, I hate to sound like I'm tooting my own horn, but it's pretty cool. And of course, when the forklift evasion sequence is done, what it's going to do is it's going to jump back here and return to business as usual, doing these action strings that are up here, and of course going back to monitoring these. Thank you for watching my video this week. Be sure to subscribe for more tutorials like this. If you have a suggestion for a tutorial, be sure to submit it in the comments section below, and I'll see you next time. Bye.